Hello everyone and welcome back to Local Liberty. This is Brian and Shane. We are back in action with our college chat series discussing questions from Shane's American Government course.
Oh yeah.
At QVCC. The question of the day is, how should we interpret the Constitution? Originalism or a living Constitution? So I think this is a good question. I translate this in my mind to what sort of law should we live under? Should we live under man-made law or just plain old law? In other words, the rule of law or the rule of man? That's how I translate this question.
Taking this deep, Brian. You're taking this deep.
I'm certainly of the opinion of we should be living under the rule of law, not the rule of man. The rule of man gets you Connecticut Special Act 2013 PA 20-20 or whatever the heck the designation was, passed on April 4th, 2013, which says that no individual can have more than 10 rounds in a magazine. That's the rule of man absurdity. The rule of law says an individual has a right to defend themselves. That's the rule of law. So, tying this back to the question, originalism versus a living constitution, I guess call me an originalist in the sense that the people that drafted the Constitution believe that simply an individual has a right to defend themselves. End of story. And not an individual can only defend themselves with 10 rounds in a magazine. Shane?
Wow. We don't talk about these segments too much before we go, and I had no idea where Brian was going to take this.
That's where I took it.
All right, so let me unpack this a bit. I agree with you about everything you said about guns. I think what's morally right is not the law, but the law itself, I don't think stands as a monolithic thing. It's not an entity unto itself. So when you try to differentiate the rule of law and the rule of man, I think they're the same thing. When man creates laws, and then we abide by those. So I'm a little confused about where you're going with that. So why don't you expand on that?
Sure. So that's a good way that you brought that up. So you say that man creates laws. I guess that is that's a fundamental departure from where I was going, and I'll explain. When I say the rule of law, that refers to natural law, and natural law I define as things that are laws that basically just exist, or man has discovered them, or man has come to find these laws through reason and experience, but man did not create them. An example of this,
something that's self-evident would be how the founders might say what you're talking about.
A self-evident as a man has a right to defend himself. That is not a law that man created. That is just self-evident. That's natural law. Nobody says to a gazelle, you do not have a right to defend yourself from a lion. People just say, hey, gazelle, if you can outrun that lion, or you got your big daddy gazelle with his 3-foot-long horns, if you can gore that lion while she's trying to eat your kid, good for you. Just like nobody says, hey, if you can kill an intruder who's trying to come into your house, I'm glad maybe you don't have to revel in the fact that somebody died, but nobody can say, hey, isn't it wrong that this person defended himself in his own home or on the street or anywhere else? So
some people will say that, though. I mean, that is the case.
Some people will, but I think they're nuts.
Okay.
Either way, what those folks say still does not change the fact that I have a right to defend myself. A gazillion people. I can be the only person left in the United States that believes that in the right of self-defense, and I still have a right to defend myself. That is natural law. So does that help explain where I'm coming from at all?
It explains where you're coming from, but I disagree with the terms you're using. But I'm not going to get into that right now because in principle we agree we have the right to defend ourselves. The use of law, I think, is kind of I don't think it's helpful in putting forth the idea that we have the right to defend ourselves. I think it might just cause more confusion, but who cares about that? Let's go back to what's the actual question about?
Okay. So the question is originalism versus a living constitution. And I guess I would ask, I'd maybe let you describe in your words, Shane, what is a living constitution?
Living constitution is essentially almost what we have. It changes with the times. Jefferson, talked a lot about originalism, and then as soon as he's in office, as soon as he's the president, he immediately does something that, not immediately, but he doesn't that he has no power to do, which is the Louisiana Purchase, right? We bought Louisiana from Napoleon. I think it was for $15 million. It was a ridiculous deal. It's 1/3 of the continental United States, Louisiana territory. But he had no power to do this, right? Napoleon offered this deal. He just wanted to get rid of it because he had some rebellions in Haiti and some other areas. Like, I don't need to deal with the colonies right now. I'm ruling Europe. Let's just get rid of this thing. The people on the ground, they're like, oh man, let's get on this deal. Jefferson finds out, let's just go with this. And at that point, Jefferson's like, well, I'm just going to shove a power in there. And that's, you could say what the Constitution is, The interstate commerce, the authority to regulate interstate commerce has been used to regulate everything, and that purview of interstate commerce has broadened over time. So that's what we have. As for originalism, interpreting the Constitution as it was made at the time, the Constitution is a pretty short document. It's very short. Compared to any of the state constitutions, it's a shorter document compared to other countries' constitutions. It's a very short, like maybe 20 pages. The framers intentionally made a lot of things vague because they didn't actually know the details. They thought people would figure it out over time. So trying to ascribe originalism, what the Constitution was originally meant for, back at the time by the people that actually created the document, I find to be very difficult because all the founders, they argued amongst themselves constantly. They all had different views on things, the Federalists and the Anti-Federalists. Yeah, you had very wide gaps between some of these people. So trying to figure out the original intent, to me it doesn't matter. The original intent, I don't care. I put forth a platform that's based on what I think is a moral, what is moral action, not based on what some piece of paper written 200 years ago was. Regardless of whether 200 years ago they believed in gun rights or not, I don't care so much. I might be interested as an historical fact, but what matters in the here and now, is it right for people to defend themselves? Do they have that ability? Should they have that ability? So, should we interpret the Constitution, originalism, or as a living constitution? We're already interpreting as a living constitution. I just think this, based on the nature of people, that's how it will be. People's social norms at the time will interpret things in different ways. I mean, when the Constitution was written, it's this great document along with the Declaration of Independence, exclaiming freedom, the virtues of freedom, and every man has a right to this and that and that. But of course, you have to remember, women were excluded from society. They had very few rights, and then of course we had the institution of slavery, right? So it's just completely contradictory, even by the people that wrote it, right? The norms and the values, and those change. And I'm going off on that tangent. This segment has gone off in way too many different directions.
Actually, no. I think this touches on a really fundamental and really important aspect of liberty. People like to accuse certain libertarians of, you don't want law. You want chaos. You don't want anybody to have any rules, any restraint. And that is so far from true. People that truly believe in individual liberty are the ones that hold up law in the highest esteem. And when they say law, or when we say law, we're not talking about how many rounds you can put in a magazine. We're talking about natural law. We're talking about moral rights. So the terminology side of this can be really confusing, can be a big rabbit hole. But at the same time,
different people use different terms even within the community itself.
But the right terms lead to the right concepts, I guess. Or I should say the right understanding of certain terms is how I think you get to the underlying concepts where people can agree. Like, you're just not going to find many people that say, nope, a gazelle doesn't have the right to defend themselves from a lion. There's not many people that believe that. And just real quick, your example that you used of Jefferson, basically doing what he wanted to do, regardless of what the Constitution said very early on. There's other examples like that too, like the Alien and Sedition Acts, the Richmond Rebellion.
Alien and Sedition Acts.
So before the ink was dry,
right.
Some of the basic fundamentals of the Constitution were violated. And to me, that goes right back to, that's a really good example of why I want the rule of law, not the rule of man. Because the rule of man gives you Jefferson doing what he wants. It gives you the Alien and Sedition Acts.
But Brian, you can't separate this. It's always the rule of man. There's no hypothetical, this imaginative lawgiver that's going to force people to do X, Y, or Z.
No. That's exactly my point. So when I strive for the rule of law, that is where individuals voluntarily understand and accept the basic tenets of natural law, which is we have our own, like we have we have a right to ourselves, we have a right to our property, and that's the foundation of a free society, and that's what I mean by rule of law. And again, I think this is a very important conversation to have, and it goes into some really deep stuff, and we could talk about it for hours. But I think this to me is the kind of conversation that should get people really thinking about the Constitution itself. What did it do? What didn't it do? How much is it worth? So this is these are the kinds of questions that are like down at the bottom of the rabbit hole in terms of libertarian thinking. So I love talking about this kind of stuff.
The epic.
I'd be glad to explore these types of ideas in a million different ways. So anything else you want to add on this one, Shane? You want to close?
I have said enough.
Alrighty. Thanks for listening, everybody. I hope a few folks in this classroom are seeing some of these episodes, and it's giving them something to think about. Check us out on Facebook and YouTube at Local Liberty in quotes, 2 words.
Click that like button.
Thanks for listening, guys. Take care.